Amelia Brooks, a 36-year-old bakery owner in the rainy city of Seattle, had built a simple yet fulfilling life after the tragic loss of her husband 2 years ago. Her small bakery was the heart of her world, where she poured her passion into creating delightful pastries for the community. Her days were spent juggling her business and caring for her adventurous 10-year-old daughter, Lila, whose laughter filled their cozy vintage cabin nestled on the edge of the woods. Despite her efforts to move forward, Amelia / 2019's life was about to take a dramatic turn. A chance encounter brought Caleb, a kind and charismatic man, into her life, bringing hope of love and family. But with Caleb came his influential mother, Victoria Grant, whose disapproval masked deeper, more sinister motives. What began as subtle tension escalated into betrayal and manipulation, leading to a pivotal moment that would change Amelia's life forever. Amelia Brooks had always considered herself a resilient woman, but the loss of her husband 2 years ago left her in pieces she wasn't sure she could ever put back together. Ryan had been her anchor, her partner in every sense of the word, and his sudden death in a tragic boating accident shattered the life they had built together. Left alone with her then 8-year-old daughter, Lila, Amelia found herself grappling with grief while trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of her child. Lila became her reason to keep going. The adventurous, tomboyish girl had her father's spirit and her mother's fierce determination, traits that shone through even in the face of such an immense loss. Lila's boundless energy and love of the outdoors often pulled Amelia out of her darkest moments. They would spend hours baking cookies in their small but inviting kitchen or taking walks through the trails near their cabin. For Amelia, these moments were small victories in her battle to reclaim joy. Her bakery, nestled in a quiet corner of Seattle, became both a refuge and a lifeline. Mornings were spent kneading dough and crafting delicate pastries that had become beloved by locals. Though she poured her heart into her work, the long hours and financial pressures were daunting. Running the bakery on her own was a challenge, but it was also her way of preserving the life she had promised to build for Lila. Despite her efforts, Amelia often felt the weight of loneliness. Evenings in their vintage cabin, filled with the soft hum of rain on the windows, were bittersweet. Lila's laughter and curiosity were a balm, but Amelia couldn't shake the sense of emptiness left by Ryan's absence. She wondered if she would ever feel whole again or if her world would remain defined by grief and survival. Then came Caleb, a chance encounter that would slowly disrupt the fragile equilibrium she had built. His easy charm and kindness toward both Amelia and Lila felt like a lifeline. But before Caleb's arrival, Amelia's world had been one of quiet endurance, filled with moments of love and strength, but also shadowed by the grief of losing the man who had been her everything. Her bond with Lila was her saving grace, but as she would soon learn, even that would be tested by the challenges that lay ahead. It was a typical overcast afternoon in Seattle when Amelia Brooks and her daughter, Lila, decided to visit the park. The rain had paused briefly, leaving the air crisp and the trails damp but inviting. Amelia often brought Lila to the park to burn off her boundless energy. Lila loved riding her bike at full speed, her laughter echoing through the trees, while Amelia found solace in the rhythmic patter of her daughter's adventures. On this particular day, however, everything changed. Amelia was seated on a bench, replying to emails on her phone, while Lila darted ahead on her bike. Her voice rang out cheerfully, calling back to her mother to watch her latest trick. "Look, Mom, I can do it with one hand." Amelia glanced up, her heart briefly seizing with both pride and fear. "Be careful, Lila," she warned, but Lila was already pedaling faster, her confidence growing. And then, disaster struck. A patch of slick mud caused Lila's bike to wobble uncontrollably. She screamed as the handlebars twisted, and she lost her balance. Amelia's heart dropped as she bolted to her feet, dropping her phone in panic. But before she could reach her daughter, a figure appeared seemingly out of nowhere. The man moved swiftly, catching Lila just as she was about to hit the ground. "Gotcha," he said in a calm, steady voice, setting her gently back on her feet. Amelia reached them moments later, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "Oh my God, thank you," she exclaimed, pulling Lila into a tight hug. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lila nodded, looking up at her savior with wide eyes. "He saved me, Mom." The man smiled warmly. He was in his early 40s, with kind eyes and a rugged demeanor that matched his rain-soaked jacket and hiking boots. "I'm just glad I was nearby," he said, his voice soft but reassuring. "I'm Caleb, by the way." "Amelia," she replied, her voice still trembling. "And this is my daughter, Lila." "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "It's no trouble," Caleb said, brushing it off with a modest shrug. "Kids are fearless, aren't they?" From that day, Caleb began appearing more frequently in their lives. At first, it was coincidental / 2014, an occasional wave at the park or a brief conversation while Lila played. But soon, those encounters grew into something more. Caleb would stop by the bakery for coffee, sometimes lingering to chat with Amelia as Lila enthusiastically shared her latest adventures. Lila adored him, nicknaming him Cabin Caleb after learning he lived in a cozy, vintage cabin nestled in the woods. He brought a steady presence to their lives, his calm demeanor contrasting Amelia's guarded reserve. Over time, Amelia found herself looking forward to his visits. Caleb's genuine interest in Lila's stories and his knack for making her laugh melted Amelia's initial apprehension. One afternoon, Caleb suggested they grab coffee together. Hesitant but curious, Amelia agreed. That simple coffee outing turned into dinner, and soon, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. Caleb wasn't just kind. He was attentive, always finding ways to make both Amelia and Lila feel special. Weekend trips to the zoo, movie nights at his cabin, and impromptu adventures slowly wove Caleb into the fabric of their lives. For the first time since Ryan's death, Amelia felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost forever / 2014 hope. Caleb was no longer just the man who had saved her daughter. He was becoming a part of their little family, and with him came the possibility of a new beginning. As the weeks turned into months, Amelia and Caleb's connection deepened in ways neither had anticipated. What began as casual encounters at the park soon blossomed into regular coffee dates and heartfelt conversations. Caleb's easy charm and attentive nature created a safe space for Amelia, something she hadn't realized she craved until he came into her life. Their first official date was simple yet perfect. Caleb invited Amelia and Lila to his vintage cabin nestled in the woods, where he cooked a hearty meal and introduced them to his dog. Max. Lila, always the adventurer, quickly took to exploring the cabin, calling out discoveries like the old-fashioned record player and Caleb's collection of nature photographs. Meanwhile, Caleb and Amelia sat on the porch, sipping tea as they talked about everything from her bakery to his work in environmental consulting. "I haven't laughed this much in ages," Amelia admitted, her cheeks warm from both laughter and Caleb's undivided attention. "Then we'll have to make sure you laugh more often," he said, his tone light but sincere. Caleb had a natural way of connecting with Lila, which only endeared him further to Amelia. He listened intently to her stories, played catch with her in the yard, and even helped her build a treehouse during one of their weekend outings. Lila, in turn, began referring to him as Cabin Caleb, a nickname she used with endless affection. "Cabin Caleb makes the best pancakes," she declared one morning after a sleepover at his place, her face smeared with syrup. Seeing Lila so happy and carefree brought a joy to Amelia's heart she hadn't felt in years. Caleb didn't just make her feel special, he made them both feel like a family. As their relationship progressed, Caleb became a steady presence in their lives. He planned little surprises, like bringing pastries from another bakery for Amelia to try, or showing up at Lila's school play with a bouquet of wildflowers. On quieter days, they'd spend evenings together at Amelia's cabin, where Lila would fall asleep on the couch while Caleb and Amelia shared stories under the soft glow of the fireplace. For Amelia, these moments were transformative. After years of feeling like she was merely surviving, Caleb made her feel alive again. She found herself rediscovering parts of her identity she thought she'd buried with Ryan. Caleb's patience, kindness, and unwavering support gave her the courage to embrace the possibility of happiness once more. As the seasons changed, so did Amelia's heart. With Caleb by her side and Lila thriving, she began to see a future that wasn't defined by loss, but by love, resilience, and hope. Caleb wasn't just someone she was falling for. He was the person helping her rebuild her life, one joyful moment at a time. It was a crisp autumn evening when Caleb decided to propose. The sun had set, leaving the sky painted in shades of deep orange and indigo. Amelia, completely unaware of what was about to happen, had been invited to Caleb's vintage cabin for what she thought was a simple family dinner. The soft glow of fairy lights strung across the backyard created a magical atmosphere, while the crackle of a small fire added warmth to the cool evening. Lila, always eager to help Caleb with his surprises, had been bubbling with excitement all day, but managed to keep the secret. She led Amelia outside, claiming Caleb wanted to show her something super cool. As Amelia stepped into the backyard, she paused, her breath catching at the sight. Caleb stood beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, a soft smile on his face. The table behind him was set with her favorite dishes, and a bouquet of wildflowers, her favorite, sat in the center. Lila darted ahead, her enthusiasm shining as she took a seat near the fire, barely able to contain her grin. "Amelia," Caleb began, stepping closer, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for hers. "From the moment I met you, you and Lila have brought light and love into my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me what family truly means, and I can't imagine a future without you both." Amelia's eyes filled with tears as Caleb got down on one knee, pulling out a small, velvet box. Inside was a delicate, vintage-inspired ring that perfectly reflected her style. "Will you marry me?" Caleb asked, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Before Amelia could answer, Lila jumped to her feet, clapping her hands and shouting, "Say yes, Mom.
Please say yes."
Amelia laughed through her tears, nodding as she pulled Caleb to his feet. "Yes, Caleb. 1,000 times yes." Lila squealed with joy, throwing her arms around them both. "I'm going to have a family. Caleb Bear is going to be my real dad." The three of them hugged tightly, their little family now officially coming together under the glow of the lights, the promise of love, and the excitement of a new beginning. Amelia Brooks had always prided herself on staying composed, but meeting Caleb's mother, Victoria Grant, tested her like nothing else. From the moment Amelia stepped into Victoria's grand estate, she felt the weight of disapproval. The mansion was as intimidating as its owner, gleaming floors, towering chandeliers, and an air of perfection that seemed designed to unsettle anyone who dared step inside. Victoria greeted her at the door with a handshake that was firm but cool, her piercing gaze sweeping over Amelia as if cataloging every flaw. "So, you're Amelia," she said, her tone polite but distant. "Caleb has spoken highly of you." Amelia forced a smile, clutching Lila's hand for reassurance. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Grant. Caleb's told me so much about you." Victoria's eyes flicked to Lila, who was clutching a small bouquet she had picked earlier as a gesture of kindness. "And this must be your daughter," Victoria said, her tone sharpening ever so slightly. "Lila, is it?" Lila nodded, holding out the bouquet with a bright smile. "I picked these for you, Mrs. Grant." Victoria accepted the flowers with a faint smile, though her gaze lingered on Lila in a way that made Amelia's stomach tighten. "How thoughtful," she said, placing the bouquet on a nearby table without a second glance. "It's charming that Caleb is so fond of children." Amelia bit her lip, sensing the unspoken judgment. The rest of the evening unfolded in a series of subtle but pointed remarks. Victoria questioned Amelia's career as a bakery owner, veiling her disdain behind a mask of polite curiosity. "You work from home, don't you? I suppose that offers a certain flexibility." Her eyes lingered on Amelia's modest dress as she continued, "It must be difficult balancing a business with raising a child on your own. Caleb has always been such a hard worker. He deserves someone who can keep up." Amelia's heart sank with each comment, but she maintained her composure, determined not to let Victoria see her flinch. Caleb, sensing the tension, tried to defuse the situation with light-hearted conversation, but Victoria's disapproval was palpable. By the time they left, Amelia felt emotionally drained. In the car, Caleb reached over to squeeze her hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "She's just protective. She'll come around." Amelia forced a smile, though doubt lingered in her mind. Victoria's disapproval wasn't just about protectiveness, it was personal. Beneath the surface of polite smiles and clipped words, Amelia could feel it. Victoria didn't just disapprove of her. She wanted her gone. The first meeting had set the tone for a battle Amelia hadn't even realized she was about to fight. From the moment Caleb and Amelia announced their engagement, Victoria Grant began to weave herself into every aspect of their wedding plans. What should have been a joyful time for Amelia quickly turned into an exhausting battle of endurance. Victoria's interference was relentless, her disapproval laced into every suggestion and decision she made. It started subtly, with comments disguised as helpful advice. "A small wedding?" Victoria said, raising an impeccably groomed eyebrow when Amelia mentioned wanting something intimate. "That won't do. Caleb deserves a celebration befitting his stature." Before Amelia could respond, Victoria had already started listing grand venues she thought would be more appropriate, most of which were far beyond what Amelia had envisioned or could afford. Amelia tried to compromise, suggesting a venue that balanced elegance and intimacy, but Victoria wasn't satisfied. "It's quaint," she remarked with a faint smirk during their visit to the venue. "But don't you think something a bit more refined would suit Caleb better?" The criticism didn't stop there. When Amelia showed Victoria her dream wedding dress, simple, timeless, and elegant, Victoria wrinkled her nose as if she'd been presented with something unworthy. "It's fine," she said, her tone barely masking her disdain. "But Caleb's bride should wear something more sophisticated. After all, this wedding will have a lot of important guests." Amelia's heart sank, but she nodded politely. For Caleb's sake, she let Victoria sway her choice, ultimately selecting a dress that was far more ornate than she had wanted. Caleb noticed her disappointment when she showed him the dress, and he wrapped her in a hug. "You're going to look beautiful no matter what," he reassured her. "Don't let her ruin this for us." Despite Caleb's support, Victoria's interference escalated. She began taking control of the guest list, inviting acquaintances and business contacts Amelia didn't even know. "We'll need to include the Graysons," Victoria insisted one evening, referring to an influential family in her social circle. "They're close friends of ours, and it would reflect poorly if they weren't invited." Amelia bit her tongue, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. But the worst part wasn't Victoria's control over the wedding details. It was her subtle, cutting remarks that chipped away at Amelia's confidence. During one planning meeting, Victoria casually remarked, "It's a shame you don't come from a more connected family. Caleb has always moved in certain circles, and it might be hard for you to adjust." Amelia clenched her fists beneath the table, fighting the urge to snap back. Instead, she forced a smile. "I'm sure Caleb and I will find our own way." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Let's hope so." Despite the emotional toll, Amelia worked hard to maintain peace for Caleb's sake. She reminded herself that Victoria was his mother, and keeping the peace was part of building their future together. But deep down, Amelia knew that no matter how much she compromised, nothing would ever be enough for Victoria. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony anymore. It had become a silent battlefield, and Amelia was fighting to hold on to her happiness. Amelia and Caleb had been over the moon when they found out they were expecting their first child together. After months of planning their wedding and building a life with Lila, the news of the pregnancy felt like the perfect next step. Amelia had worried about how Lila would react, but her adventurous daughter's excitement melted all her concerns. One evening, as the three of them sat down for dinner at Caleb's cozy cabin, Amelia decided it was time to share the news. She set a small wrapped box in front of Lila and told her to open it. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes. Lila's eyes widened as she looked from the shoes to her mother. "Does this mean I'm going to be a big sister?" Amelia nodded, tears of joy welling up in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. You're going to be the best big sister ever." Lila squealed with excitement, throwing her arms around Amelia. "I'm so happy. I'm going to teach the baby everything I know." Caleb beamed, pulling Amelia into a warm embrace. "This is the best news," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Our family just keeps growing." Over the next few days, Caleb couldn't wait to share the news with his mother, hoping it might soften her demeanor toward Amelia. But Amelia was hesitant. She had come to expect resistance from Victoria, even in moments that should bring people closer. When Caleb called Victoria to share the news, he couldn't hide his excitement. "Mom, Amelia and I have some wonderful news. You're going to be a grandmother." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Victoria finally spoke, her tone was sharp. "A grandmother? Are you sure this is good news, Caleb? Have you even considered if the baby is really yours?" Caleb's face hardened as Amelia stood frozen, overhearing the conversation. "Mom, how can you even say that? Of course the baby is mine." Victoria, however, wasn't done. "Caleb, you need to think carefully. A woman like Amelia could use a pregnancy to trap you. You've always been too trusting." Tears filled Amelia's eyes as Caleb defended her. "Mom, you're out of line. I love Amelia, and we're building a family together. You need to stop." But Victoria didn't stop. A few days later, Caleb confessed to Amelia that his mother had taken things even further. "She hired a private investigator," he said, his voice filled with anger. "She wants to dig into your past, Amelia. She thinks you're hiding something." Amelia's heart sank. What does she expect to find? "I've done nothing wrong." "I know that," Caleb said, pulling her close. "And I told her as much. But you know how she is. She's determined to control everything." Knowing someone was watching her left Amelia constantly on edge. She started glancing over her shoulder whenever she left the bakery, her nerves fraying under the weight of Victoria's distrust. Lila sensed her mother's unease and tried to cheer her up with her usual antics, but the stress was undeniable. Despite Caleb's support, the joy of the pregnancy announcement had been tainted by Victoria's cruelty. Amelia realized that Victoria wasn't just disapproving, she was determined to drive a wedge between them, no matter the cost. But Amelia resolved to protect her family, even if it meant standing up to Victoria in ways she never had before. The invitation to dinner at Victoria Grant's mansion had come with an air of false pleasantry. "Let's try to start fresh," Victoria had said, her tone clipped and insincere. Caleb, ever hopeful, encouraged Amelia to accept. "Maybe she's finally coming around," he said. Amelia wasn't convinced, but agreed for his sake. Deep down, she knew that Victoria's invitation was more about control than reconciliation. The day of the dinner arrived, and Amelia spent hours suppressing the growing pit in her stomach. She picked out a modest dress and tried to calm her nerves for Lila's sake. Lila, as usual, was her bright, optimistic self, excited about the grand house and curious to see if Caleb's mother might finally warm to them. "Don't worry, Mom," she said cheerfully. "You're the best." The mansion, as always, loomed with an air of intimidation. As they stepped inside, the tension was palpable. Victoria greeted them with her usual veneer of politeness, her eyes scanning Amelia and Lila with thinly veiled judgment. Dinner was served in the grand dining room, its long table adorned with fine china and crystal glasses. But the elegant setting couldn't mask the frostiness in Victoria's demeanor. Throughout the meal, Victoria's barbed comments cut through the conversation. "So, Amelia," she said, her voice smooth but dripping with condescension. "How is your little bakery? It must be quite the challenge, balancing that with raising a child." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Especially now that you're expecting. I do hope you're not relying too heavily on Caleb to pick up the slack." Amelia forced a smile, her knuckles white as she gripped her fork. "The bakery is doing well, thank you. And Caleb and I make a great team." Victoria's lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. "I suppose that's one way to look at it." Caleb tried to deflect, but Victoria's comments only grew more pointed as the evening progressed. By the time dessert was served, Amelia could feel her patience unraveling. When she excused herself to the restroom, she welcomed the chance to breathe and collect herself. But as she stood at the top of the grand staircase, staring down at the lavish decor below, she heard footsteps behind her. Victoria's voice came, cold and sharp. "You'll never be good enough for my son." Amelia turned slowly, her heart pounding. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you, Mrs. Grant. Caleb and I love each other, and we're building a family, whether you approve or not." Victoria stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You're nothing but a burden. I won't let you ruin his life." Before Amelia could respond, Victoria lunged forward, her hand outstretched. The shove was unexpected but deliberate, and Amelia lost her balance. The world tilted as she tumbled down the stairs, her body hitting each step with a sickening thud. The last thing she heard before everything went black was Lila's terrified scream. "Mommy." The first thing Amelia felt was the dull, throbbing pain that radiated through her body. The sterile smell of the hospital filled her senses, and when she tried to move, a sharp ache stopped her. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, and the blurry shapes around her began to take form. Caleb was sitting at her bedside, his head in his hands, his normally calm demeanor replaced by visible worry. "Caleb," Amelia croaked, her voice weak and raspy. His head shot up, and relief washed over his face as he reached for her hand. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Thank God." Amelia blinked, her mind struggling to piece together what had happened. Then it hit her. The dinner, the stairs, Victoria's cold words. Panic surged through her chest. "The baby," she whispered, her free hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "Is the baby okay?" Caleb squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He's here, Amelia. Our son is safe. They had to perform an emergency C-section, but he's healthy." Relief flooded through her, and tears streamed down her face. "I need to see him." Caleb pressed the call button for the nurse, and within moments, a nurse wheeled in a small bassinet. She carefully placed a tiny, swaddled baby in Amelia's arms. Amelia looked down at her newborn son, his tiny fingers curling against her chest. He was perfect, and despite the pain and trauma, love overwhelmed her. "We named him Noah," Caleb said softly. "I thought you'd like that." Amelia nodded, unable to speak as she cradled their son. But the peace of the moment was short-lived as her mind returned to the fall. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling, "your mother, she pushed me." His jaw tightened, and anger flickered in his eyes. "I know," he said firmly. "Lila saw everything. She told me, and I've already spoken to the police." Amelia's heart ached for her daughter, who had witnessed such a terrifying moment. "And Diana?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's been arrested," Caleb said. "They've charged her with attempted murder." Hearing those words brought a mix of emotions, vindication, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. "She could have killed me," Amelia whispered, holding Noah closer. "She could have killed our son." "She won't hurt us again," Caleb promised, his voice steady. "You, Noah, and Lila, you're my family now. That's all that matters." The trial was a whirlwind of emotions, testing Amelia's strength and resolve. Diana Grant, once a woman of untouchable status, now sat in the defendant's chair, her composed exterior betraying none of the turmoil beneath. The courtroom was packed, reporters and spectators alike eager to witness the downfall of an influential socialite. Amelia watched from her seat, her body still healing but her spirit unwavering. Caleb sat beside her, his hand in hers, offering silent support. Lila was nearby, bravely preparing to give her testimony. Amelia's heart ached for her daughter, knowing how much courage it would take to speak about that fateful night. The prosecution presented a clear case against Diana. They detailed her history of controlling behavior, her blatant hostility toward Amelia, and, most damning of all, her actions during the family dinner. Lila's testimony was the turning point. Taking the stand, Lila clutched a small stuffed animal Caleb had given her for comfort. Though nervous, her voice was steady as she recounted what she had seen. Grandma Diana told my mom she wasn't good enough for Caleb, Lila said, her small hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. Then she pushed her. She didn't slip. Grandma made her fall. The courtroom fell silent as Lila's words hung in the air. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, pride mixing with the pain of knowing her daughter had to relive that moment. The defense tried to argue that the fall was an accident, but Lila's detailed account, paired with other evidence, left little room for doubt. Diana's demeanor throughout the trial remained cold and unrepentant. She never once looked at Amelia or Lila, her focus solely on maintaining what little composure she had left. But as the jury delivered their verdict, her mask cracked. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Diana Grant, guilty of attempted murder," the foreperson announced. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the judge delivered Diana's sentence, 10 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 5. Amelia felt a wave of relief wash over her, though it was tinged with sadness for Caleb, who had lost his mother in the process. Outside the courtroom, reporters clamored for statements, but Amelia's words were simple. "I did what any mother would do. I protected my family." As they left the courthouse, Amelia held Lila's hand tightly, with baby Noah cradled in Caleb's arms. Justice had been served, but more importantly, they had emerged stronger, together as a family. The weeks following the trial were a mix of quiet relief and cautious rebuilding. Diana's absence, while a source of peace, left shadows of what had transpired. But Amelia was determined not to let the pain of the past define their future. Together with Caleb, Lila, and baby Noah, she focused on what truly mattered, their family. Noah quickly became the center of their world. His sweet coos and tiny smiles brought light into their home, softening even the heaviest moments. Lila embraced her role as a big sister with boundless enthusiasm. She would sit beside his bassinet, singing lullabies or making funny faces to coax out giggles. "Mom, I think I'm his favorite," she would say with pride, her laughter infectious. One sunny afternoon, Noah reached a milestone that brought the whole family together. He wobbled on unsteady legs in the living room, his tiny hands stretched toward Caleb. "Come on, buddy," Caleb encouraged, kneeling with open arms. Lila clapped her hands excitedly, cheering him on. With a determined shuffle, Noah took his first steps, falling right into Caleb's embrace. The room erupted in cheers, with Lila declaring, "I knew he could do it." Amelia watched the scene with tears in her eyes, grateful for the love and joy that now filled their lives. These moments reminded her of how far they had come. From the darkness of betrayal and fear, they had emerged as a stronger, closer family. Evenings became their favorite time. After the kids were asleep, Amelia and Caleb would sit on the porch of his vintage cabin, the cool Seattle air surrounding them. They would talk about their dreams, their plans for the future, and their gratitude for one another. "You've made us a family," Caleb said one night, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Amelia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "We've all made each other stronger," she replied. "And no matter what, we'll keep building this life together." As the seasons changed, so did their hearts. They weren't just healing, they were thriving, finding joy in the everyday moments that made life beautiful. Together, they knew they could face anything. As Amelia sat by the window of their cozy cabin, watching the rain softly patter against the glass, she couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. The past year had tested her in ways she never imagined. Grief, betrayal, and fear had threatened to break her. Yet, through it all, she had found strength she didn't know she had. Her family was her anchor. Lila's laughter, Noah's innocent wonder, and Caleb's unwavering love had carried her through the darkest days. They weren't perfect, and scars from the past lingered, but those scars told a story of resilience, growth, and love. Amelia smiled as she heard Lila giggle from the next room, likely coaxing another laugh from Noah. In that moment, she realized something profound. Their family wasn't defined by what they had endured, but by the unshakable bond they had built. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were home.